Hey, I'm Josh, and I'm back with some recommendations for pastors from 2020. Here's some books that I read that I found really, really helpful. And I know there's a number of you pastors who follow my reading schedule and have been helped by some of the recommendations that I've given. And some of you have been asking me when I'm going to kind of release my thoughts on some books that I've read here in 2020. And so here you go. If you are interested in Christian leadership in some sort of way, here's my recommendations, and a couple more actually that I forgot to grab the book, but I'll mention here in a minute. And if you want just my general recommendations really for any Christians, there's another video that I recorded just before this that actually looks a lot like this, and we're in the same shirt and everything. So you can check that out and get my general top 7 of 2020 for anyone who wants to just kind of grow in the Christian faith, some good recommendations there. And then I'm also going to post on my blog my top 10 favorites, which might include some of these, but also I'm going to include some others that maybe didn't make my recommendation list or my pastor list, but I just enjoyed. And so I'm kind of going at this a little bit different this year. But so here you go. This is the things that I think are worth your time as a pastor to be aware of and maybe consider reading. So number 5. I've got 2 bonus ones as well, but number 5, Timothy Keller's Center Church. So this is all about how to be gospel-centered, city-centered, and movement-centered, and doing balanced gospel-centered ministry in your city. So this is kind of like the church planting manual in many ways. He does such a great job of really walking through all the theological issues, cultural issues, biblical issues, missiological issues. It's just full of graphics and quotes, and it's just really, really substantial academic work, and also with a lot of practical counsel on how to discern how to be gospel-centered and do ministry in your city. So I don't agree with necessarily everything that Tim Keller says in this book, but I think I have a highlight on just about every page. He made me think on every page. And maybe if maybe even in the places where I didn't necessarily land where he did, he helped me think. And so this is just a great book for anyone that's involved in Christian ministry, just to kind of glean the wisdom and recommendations of Tim Keller, and then kind of work through them yourself biblically and kind of based on who you are and where you're at. You'll be helped by this, and especially if you're planting a church, it's well worth reading, because it'll make you think, and it'll help cover some of the gaps about things maybe you're not thinking about, and be more effective. So this one was fun. This is number 4, Saving Eutychus: How to Preach God's Word and Keep People Awake. So this comes from that story in Acts where Paul is preaching so late into the night that a young man falls out of a 3rd-story window or whatever and dies, and then Paul goes and raises him back to life. And so the idea is don't be like Paul in that sense and preach in such a way that people fall asleep and die. So it's kind of a clever title, Saving Eutychus. Make sure there's no Eutychuses in your church that are falling asleep because of your boring sermon and then dying. So I don't know if that's really fair, but it's funny. So this is a really a fun book. Very much written by a couple of British guys who train people in preaching. I don't agree with everything in here, but it helped me. Think through some aspects of my own preaching in a way to try to just be more engaging, more thoughtful, faithful to the text, interesting. And so it's worth reading. It's worth reading because it takes a little bit of a different approach than a lot of preaching books, and it's really, I found it helpful. I don't preach like these guys. I don't intend to preach like these guys, but I was helped. I was helped by what they had to say. They made me think about things I had thought before in my preaching, and I think I'm better for it. Here's another one. We actually read this as a congregation in anticipation of planting our church, actually in the first few months. That was on purpose. So Church in Hard Places: How the Local Church Brings Life to the Poor and Needy by Mez McConnell and Mike McKinley. So this is all about, hey, the best way to engage poverty is by having a healthy local church. Because just handing out food to people just creates an endless cycle. That's good. Housing matters. Laws matter. Poverty alleviation matters. But unless you're getting to the heart of people's need for the gospel, they won't have the power to change. They won't have the resources to stay changed. And the local church proclaiming the gospel, providing a loving community is the best way to alleviate poverty. It's slower, it's longer, it doesn't have the immediate effects that some other social ministries have, But if you have a well-ordered church that's clear on the gospel, that has real covenant membership that means something with one another, and you're preaching the Bible well, that is going to be the answer. It's going to be the slow answer. It's going to be the foolishness of the world. It's going to be 1 Corinthians, kind of like, hey, no one's going to believe this works, and it works because the gospel is the power of God into salvation. So if you're wanting to think about how to engage the needy in your community more effectively, think theologically about church membership, church discipline, expositional preaching, the clarity of the gospel, and that's how you're going to help the poor. That's how you're going to help the needy most effectively over the long haul, is to have a well-ordered, clear church. And so there you go. I would highly commend that one to you. All right, my second, my number 2 here is Imperfect Pastor by Zach Eswine. Discovering joy in our limitations through daily apprenticeship with Jesus. This was such an encouragement to me, especially here in 2020, where I was beginning to feel the pressure of everybody's expectations, and I had to make the right decision according to everybody and according to the government and according to God. I just had to be perfect all the time. This book was just very, very helpful, The Imperfect Pastor, and it just frees you to be the human being that God created you to be, and to realize that your first and foremost priority is to be in an apprenticeship with Jesus, to follow him. There is a pressure that you put on yourself, that other pastors put on you, that your church puts on you, that the culture puts on you, to do something big, fast, and famous. And that's kind of the key here. And he's like, you know what the Bible lays out? Slow, unseen, and small. Like, that's what Jesus is about. When Jesus came, he invested himself in a very small ragtag group of nobodies. And that was his way. And you think of Paul as this guy who plants all these tiny little churches all across the Mediterranean. It's slow, it's unseen, and it's small. And it's not famous, and it's not big. And so yeah, that's kind of the heart of this book. It'll be good for you. It'll be good for you because it's going to push against all of your natural tendencies. It's going to push against the sinful tendencies that you feel in your church to go fast, to be quick, to get results. And he'll point you back to the biblical model, and you'll have a much more joy as a pastor, I think, if you read and apply what the things he's talking about. So my number 1 book here is by Paul David Tripp, Lead, 12 Gospel Principles for Leadership in the Church. This is kind of a sequel to his Dangerous Calling book. If you've read his Dangerous Calling book, it's excellent. It's all about what a pastor needs to know going into the ministry, that there are tremendous dangers that come with pastoral ministry on every level. Personally, relationally, spiritually, you are going to have temptations and spiritual attack. You're going to have criticism from so-called friends. You're going to get attacked almost relentlessly. And so Dangerous Calling is very much, how does the man himself prepare for this calling of pastoral ministry? Well, what he found is in the years subsequent to that is that guys were still falling in ministry, falling into moral failure, taking their own lives. It's amazing right now how many pastors are going to be resigning in the next 6 months because they've just gotten the tar beat out of them. And so there is going to be a major pastoral crisis. And you know, he was seeing that, and he's like, we need to not only create people who are healthy personally, that's what Dangerous Calling is about, but embed them in healthy leadership cultures. So they need to have brothers. They need to have fellow leaders within the church or fellow leaders outside the church that help them be healthy and avoid moral scandal, help them avoid theological scandal, help them not to quit in ministry. And so this book was very timely. And so if you have an elder board, read this with them. At this point, I don't have an elder board, and so I have strategically, even prior to reading this, but I'm even more confirmed in reading this, is that I have a functional accountability team of different people, pastors from other churches, my sending church, because I want this and I need this, and I won't make it in ministry without this. And so I would encourage you pastors to really consider this tremendous wisdom. I've never seen a book quite like this that's really about leadership culture in the church and how that helps sustain the pastor. A couple others that I didn't bring the books for that I would just commend to you as well to consider is one is called Humble Calvinism by J.A. Metters. So he kind of makes fun of the fact that those of us that hold to a more reformed Calvinistic perspective often are not the most humble people. We're usually very arrogant jerks. And so he's like, hey, if we really understand what our theology teaches, we should be the most humble, gentle, gracious people on the planet. So he just walks through that and really kind of unfolds how I reformed and reformedist position, if it's really true, and I think it is, really should lead us to be a lot different than we actually come across a lot of the time. So Humble Calvinism by J.A. Metters is really, really good. And then One Assembly by Jonathan Leeman. He makes the case that churches that have multiple services may in effect be going against what the biblical design of the church is. That the actual church in the New Testament is an ecclesia, which means gathering. So the whole idea of one church in two locations, or one church that gathers in separate parts at two different times, that's actually at the essence of the word assembly in the New Testament. Ecclesia is one people gathered in one place at one time. And so he just makes the biblical theological case that multi-site and particularly even multi-service might actually not biblically be serving as a church. So it's provocative. It's worth thinking about. Don't just write it off just because it's not what you do. Consider it and just go, man, if you care about your people and you care about your church, it's at least worth considering the warning and the encouragement that he puts in that book. And frankly, I agree with him. I think he presses it a little harder than I would, but that's actually the conviction that I have as well, is that I think ecclesia means one gathering of people at one time and place, and that's actually the biblical ecclesia. But you can read the book for yourself. It's worth reading. And even if you don't land where he does, you'll be helped by thinking carefully through those theological things. So that's One Assembly by Jonathan Leeman. So hopefully there's something in there that's helpful to you. You can check out my Goodreads. There's also stuff that I've read in the past that if you are looking for something, be happy to kind of recommend some things, and would love to hear some recommendations on some books that you've read. I've got a stack at home on my shelf of great books that I'm looking forward to that I already anticipate will be on my 2021 list. I just know that they're going to be really great. But pastors, let's stay in this together. Let's read good books together. And I hope maybe I can contribute to kind of helping you in your ministry. Hang in there. This is a tough year. There's going to be a lot fewer of us in the next few months or years, and I hope that you'll stick it out. I hope that these books will be an encouragement to you, and that we'll come out the other side, that the pressure and heat will make us into diamonds, that we will come out of this better and more valuable, and our churches will be healthier because of it. And maybe these books will serve a purpose in that. So thanks.